Okay, this is going to carry on for too long. Here. All right. These are our leftover. I know some of you already have these. These are the shirts that Terrence Dindy made for my wife. This is all I've got left. So I'm going to leave these up here after the lesson's over, after the whole afternoon is over. And if y'all can come pick through it and find one in your size, that's fine. I don't know what sizes are left. This is all there's ever going to be. So if you don't have one and want one, good luck. It's like the Hunger Games for T-shirts. Can anybody tell me what 1 Timothy 4:12 says? Just quote it. Somebody quote it. 1 Timothy 4:12.
Let no man despise thy youth, but be thou an example of
Believers. Believers. Yep.
in word and conversation, in charity,
Nailed it, man. Good job. Great job. All right, what does it mean then? Let no man despise thy youth. Go ahead. I like it. Not to let anybody think you're too small to do something. We had a lesson about that a little bit ago, didn't we? Derek talked about David and Goliath. Here's what it means to let no man despise. Here's what I thought it meant when I was a idealistic and somewhat cocky teenager, all right? Was that you don't get to look down at me for the decisions I make because I'm young. And I learned as I got older, that ain't what it means. That's involved, but that's not it. Here's what it means. You live so that nobody looks down on you for being young. Don't make the typical young, dumb decisions that you know not to make that would cause older people not to trust you. Literally, when Paul says that, he says, don't let not even one think down about you because of your newness. That's what the word youth means, newness. Appreciate J.J. Mygett put me back there in the wise category earlier today. But that literally is the old category back there. Because the words mean new and old. Youth means new. You're new. So don't let anybody think down about you because of how new you are. You know, older people are to give a little bit of slack because they were new at one point too. But it comes down to us. And it's going to be involved in your life for a long time. You're not going to just be a young person until you're 18 and legally you're old enough to not be young anymore. You're 21 or whatever other ages we put on it. You're still a young person. It's going to be involved in your life then too. No matter what part of life you're in, you will always have someone older than you to live up to. So when Paul says, don't let anybody despise you, don't let it, not even one think down about you because of your newness, he means you've got to live a certain way. That's why he says, but be an example of believers in all of these different facets of life. Be an example of the believers. What does that mean? Somebody. Howie.
To live as a Christian.
Right. Why?
Because it's important and necessary.
Absolutely. And there's another reason. Because people are watching, and when they see you and they know that you're from a Christian family, and they see you do something right, they go, you know what? I bet that kid's got great parents, or great grandparents, or they go to a great church. Guess what they might think if they see you do something bad? What? I wonder what their parents are like. I wonder what that church they go to is like that allows them to act that way. When you live in the world as a Christian, I'm an example of you. You're an example of me. We represent each other. We're a family. We're a community. We're the body of Jesus. So don't give anybody a reason, not even one person, to think down about you because of how young you are, no matter how old you are. That's not what my lesson was about, but I just felt like I had to say that. I was asked to speak this hour on the greatest person who's ever lived. And in a season of his life that we don't see much of. We're introduced to him at his birth, really introduced to him as a prophecy of his birth. Then we're introduced to him finally when he's born. And you know his birth was miraculous. And you know all of the circumstances around his birth were amazing. There was no room in the inn, and so he was born in a barn. He was born in a barn and laid in a manger, which is where the animals eat. And he was born to a poor family, a man who was a carpenter, and a woman who would soon be his wife, gave birth to a child in a barn, laid it in a manger, and rich people brought gold to that baby. That's a strange way to be born, isn't it? Did that happen to any of you? Ain't no rich guy visited me when I was born, I'll tell you that. But then we go a period of years without knowing anything about him. He goes from being a baby to a 12-year-old. From the time he's 12, we miss the next few years. We don't see him again until he's 30. There's one verse we'll look at that kind of covers that period of time. But we want to zero in on him when he was 12. And we want to see why or what he was doing that made him such a great example for us as young folks. Don't despise me. Here's why: I'm about my Father's business. Now there's a couple things that have to do with Luke 2:49 and following, and the verses beforehand, that are very, very special and specific to what was happening then, and they don't apply to us just right across the board. When Jesus told his mother and his father in the temple that day, I must be about my Father's business, he was not saying something you and I can say. He was not doing something you and I can do. But he was setting a precedent and giving us an example to follow. And we learn to apply that. We'll get to that in a minute. Let's look at our text, Luke 2. And to save on time, we won't go all the way back. But the gist of it is what? What happened? Somebody tell me, what did Mary and Joseph do leading up to this that caused this to happen? What happened? Anybody? Even some of you in the wisdom section. What happened? Yeah, and what were they doing? Going home, weren't they? How long did it take them to get there? 3 days. So they went 3 days without him, all the way home, and got there and recognized he wasn't with somebody else. We left him in Jerusalem. And so they went 3 days back. And they went to Jerusalem to find him. And where is he when they find him? He's in the temple. All right, Luke 2:48. When they saw him, they were amazed, and his mother said unto him, Son, why hast thou thus dealt with us? Why'd you do this to us? Anybody ever been lost? And were your parents a little upset with you at first? And then eventually that upset breaks into joy, or maybe it's the other way around. You're elated with joy, and then you get smacked for being lost in the first place. Kind of what's happening with Mary and Jesus. Why'd you treat us like this? Behold, we've been looking for you and sorrowing over you. We've been looking for you and sorrowing over you. What was she amazed at? Somebody read verse 48. Excuse me, 47. All right, my bad. 46 and 47. Isn't that amazing? What's it mean, a doctor? He was sitting with medical doctors. I mean, it's actually an incorrect term for that word, doctor. A doctor is a person who teaches. He's sitting with people who have their whole lives, adult men who have spent their whole lives memorizing the Old Testament, and they're asking him questions. He's 12, folks. And his mother hears this, and she's amazed by it. They were amazed by it. What is his answer to all this? Verse 49, he said unto them, How is it that you sought for me? Don't you know that I'm here to be about my Father's business? What a mature statement for a 12-year-old. I must be about my Father's business. You and I aren't about our Father's business in the same way he was. He was here for a super specific reason. He was here to be a scapegoat for our sins. He was here. His business was going to culminate in just a few years. And I believe at this point, I don't know when it started, but I know that at this point he understands that his life is going to come to an abrupt and painful end in just a few years. And he's going to do that because every soul that's lived on this earth, before him and since, was lost and would be lost. And at 12, he says, I must be about my Father's business. Here's the example for us. In order for us to be about our Father's business, not in that we're here to save anybody's soul and that we're going to sacrifice ourselves as an atonement to buy that soul, but we use him as an example for us. If I want to be about my Father's business, I have to be counterculture. Now, some of the wisdom section just went, oh, why are you going to talk about counterculture? Because there's a phrase, counterculture, that's one word, and it means it's hippies. Right? You know about the hippies from the 60s. They were nasty, and they caused a lot of problems that we're still dealing with today. I don't mean that. I mean literally counter to the culture. Jesus was, in fact, being counterculture when he was in the temple talking with the doctors and the lawyers and those priests and whoever else was around. That's counter to the culture. What were boys doing, you think, when Jesus was a boy himself? They probably weren't sitting in temples teaching practiced lawmen, were they? Probably doing something illegal. Do you do a lot of stuff that's illegal? How old are you? Yeah, you probably do. Probably do. But you know, you're probably right. I imagine there was a lot of illegal activity going on because kids will be kids, right? And the kids who don't have supervision, they do really bad things. Grown-ups will be grown-ups. Are you preaching or am I? You and your red corduroys. Stay away from toilets. He was being counterculture in that he was not doing the things that the world was doing. He was doing something that had to do with what his Father wanted him to do. He wanted him to do. Counterculture for us is not that we don't partake in anything that has to do with culture, but that our character has to be in stark contrast to the character of people in the world. An example that we often talk about is movies, things that come on the radio. Here's my question, though, about that stuff. Video games. I'm going to send you to the back in a minute. Or I'm going to go to the back. But here's the thing about the culture. We're still paying to go see the movies, aren't we? So why are we complaining about it? You either complain about it and stop doing it, or shut up about it and do it. But we shouldn't do that one. And instead of just giving culture over to the world and say, I'm not going to have anything to do with it, but I'm not really going to stop it either, what we should do is create our own part of pop culture. You know, there's a movie out now that's gaining a lot of notoriety for good or bad reasons called Unplanned. And I've not seen that movie. I'm not going to endorse it without having seen it. I understand it to have a good, great even, moral story. There's been movies in recent years like The Apostle Paul, or movies about Jesus, or other biblical characters that have come out that teach those biblical stories. But you know what the problem with those movies is? And we're talking about culture here, so go with me. You know what the problem with those movies is? Most of the time they're just really dumb. How many of you are going to see the trailer for Avengers Endgame and then see the trailer for The Apostle Paul and go, this weekend, I'm going out to see The Apostle Paul in the theater with all my friends. We're going to get popcorn and Cokes, and we're going to, all group of us going to go see that movie. Are you going to do that?
No.
No, you're not. You're going to go see Avengers Endgame. So if we are complaining about culture, and we should be, then we need to create something in culture that means something, that is good. We can change culture. We ought to be involved in the arts. You know, when I see these guys who are great athletes, and some who are here who can act or write, who can play a musical instrument and can be a real part of something, that makes me feel good because you're a Christian. And you can carry your Christian character into that area and make a difference. I think sometimes we've confined Christianity to this box, and we say that we have to evangelize just this way, and we just door knock. And door knocking hasn't worked for 40 years, we say, so we don't even do that. But that's really the only way we can evangelize. And yet I can go out, if I know how to play an instrument, or I'm good at a sport, I can go out and live like a Christian, teach like a Christian in that area, and make a difference, make a change for people. Let's not think that we have to stay away from culture. Instead, let's go and involve ourselves in it in a way that we can change it. I promise you, this world isn't going to become crumbling down because of politics. It's going to happen because of culture. In the realm of importance in society, religion sits at the top. It always has, it always will, and it doesn't matter what your teachers or the president or your friends say about it. Religion is at the top. You take religion out of society, society will crumble. Below that, somewhere, is politics, but in between the two is culture. Culture is way more important than politics. Don't worry about what the president says. Don't worry about what the Speaker of the House says. As much as you worry about what people in the culture are doing. You know who has the power over us? The people who we see on our TVs all the time. And what I've noticed is the people who are famous and on TV, even since I was a kid, have gotten so much more immoral than they used to be. I have a problem with knowing the name Cardi B, all right? I should not know who that is. That is a despicable and disgusting human being, and yet I know who she is. I don't have Instagram. I don't have Twitter. And I don't follow that kind of stuff on Facebook. I don't listen to that kind of music, if you can call it that, and yet I know who she is because she's a cultural icon. And she has an effect on our lives, doesn't she? And she does in this section anyway. You're all ashamed to say it, but you know who she is, don't you? You probably have read some of her tweets. You've probably listened to some of her music. We ought to engage in culture as a teacher, not just a consumer. As a creator. We can create a culture. Christians need to come together and create a culture that can involve other people and let them know about the Lord and the church will grow because of it. We have to be counter to the culture, not anti-culture. And not indulging in all the culture either. Create a culture of our own. There's a culture in this room that involves all of you. And it's like a honey, like a beehive. You get around, all these kids come together, and there's a buzz literally in the room where you can hear everybody talking and laughing, and you feel it. It feels good. That's why we look forward to this every year. You can take that, don't you know, and have that next week too. It doesn't have to be on youth rally weekends. Or it doesn't have to happen just at lectureships. In fact, I've read in the Bible in Acts 2, verse 47, that said that they did all things together. And in verses later, it says that they were together every day. It says they were together daily. They ate together. They worshiped together. When it was time to worship, they worshiped together and that they would sing. Y'all like to sing, don't you? Kinda. Whose idea was it to put the teensy ones up front? It was Connor's fault? Why don't you sit on a pew? No, sit on a pew. What was I talking about? Somebody remind me.
How video games are awesome.
About video? That's not what I was talking about. Thank you, being together every day. They were together on a daily basis. They sang, they ate together, they did all these things together. And you know, we can do that too. We can have the first century Christian culture that allows us to come together and be a family on a daily basis, if we will. But you know what we do instead? Is we involve ourselves so heavily in other stuff that we hardly ever see each other. Is that right or no?
Right.
It's right, isn't it? Sports are great. They teach character. They teach valuable lessons about fitness. They teach all kinds of things, and they're wonderful, and they're fun. And competition's a good thing. But it's not everything. And if we engulf ourselves in so much sports that we're not allowed to be around our Christians because I'm always obligated somewhere else, it's a problem. Being in a band is important. Music is a language that speaks to everyone. But if it's so important that you can't be around Christians on a regular basis, then it's a problem. Hobbies are wonderful. Same thing. If you can't be around Christians, why are we even here? Let me tell you something. I try not to always be real personal. But if it weren't for Christians of the last 7 months of my life, I wouldn't be preaching anymore, I'll tell you that. And there have been moments where I might not even consider, I'll just leave that alone. Wouldn't be preaching anymore. But because people come and they put their arm around me when I need it, and they remind me who is out there. I sit in a hospital room, and so does my little wife. We live there. And we know there are millions of prayers for us every day. That wraps us in a cocoon of Christian culture, and we just thrive there. And we're going to be beautiful butterflies at the end of it. We can create our own culture, but we have to be counterculture, popular culture that is. Create a culture among yourselves and make that permeate popular culture. Don't be afraid when the people who you associate with dislike what you're doing because it's not as cool or as fun. Let your culture change theirs. And let's stop being so weak as a group that we lose so many of our own to the popular culture of the day. Jesus, at 12, sat in the temple and studied with priests. Taught them things they didn't know. You and I can't do that. We're not miraculous beings. We're not God incarnate. But we can learn from his example that even at a young age, we can have a counterculture of our own that creates good things and teaches people about the Lord. Another thing, that was what he was doing. But what was he saying? He said, I must be about my Father's business. I need to be counterculture. I also need to have a central focus. Need to have a central focus. Think about this. I don't know when Jesus came to the understanding that he was the Son of Jehovah God. I know that at 12 years old he knew it though. He doesn't say we must be about our Father's business and include the people who were there with him and include us as well. He doesn't say that. He says, I must be about my Father's business. He understood who God was. He understood his relationship with God, and he acted accordingly. Do you know your relation to God? Because of his understanding of a relationship he had with God, he had a central focus, and nothing deterred him from it. Do you think Jesus never had fun? One of the greatest things I think about, to just speculate, what was it like for Jesus and his 12 apostles to be together, and they weren't teaching, and they weren't curing the masses, and they weren't doing wonderful works to glorify God? For what were they like when they were alone? Don't you think they kicked back and had fun and laughed? And people have done that forever. I know I do it. And he had to have. The Bible talks about how he would go away from the multitude to be alone with his best friends. He enjoyed life, but he understood his relationship to God. Do you understand your relationship to God? What about this? I'm a soldier in God's army. Paul told Timothy, you war a good warfare. Timothy, you're not here to just passively go around and tell people about how awesome Jesus is, but you go about and tell them about how terrible he is too. I'm a soldier in his army. What was Paul's last words, or almost his last words to Timothy? I have fought. I fought the good fight of faith. Implied. I'm a soldier in his army. That's my relationship to God. I'm also a son of his. 1 John 3 and verse 1 says, behold, what manner of love the Father has bestowed upon us, that we should be called the sons of God. I'm a son in the Father's house. I'm a soldier in his army. I'm a son in his house. Think about this too. Romans chapter 8, he talks about being an heir and a citizen in God's kingdom. Romans chapter 8, beginning of verse 12. Therefore, brethren, we are debtors not to the flesh, to live after the flesh. For if we live after the flesh, if you live after the flesh, you shall die. But if you through the Spirit do mortify or kill the deeds of the body, ye shall live. For as many as have been led by the Spirit, they are the sons of God. For ye have not received the spirit of bondage again to fear, but ye have received the spirit of adoption, whereby we cry, Abba, Father. We've received the spirit of adoption. He adopted us. The Spirit itself bears witness with our spirit that we are the children of God. I can't pass over that without answering it a little bit. It's going to bring up some questions, no doubt. It doesn't mean the Holy Spirit does some weird, miraculous thing to me. What it means is when I live my life and compare it to the Spirit's words, I learn, okay, I'm His. The Spirit bears witness that we are His if we're doing what He says. And if we're children, we're heirs. So I was adopted by Him when I had no parents. And because I'm adopted by Him, I'm His son. And if I'm His son, then I'm an heir of His great abundance. We are heirs and joint heirs with Christ. If so be that we suffer with Him, that we may also be glorified together. The sons of God. Not just the sons in just this general idea, but what does that mean? It means that I inherit what He has. What does He have? Everything. What's my relation to God? I'm the object of His great love and desire. He sent His Son to die not for you, but for me. Isn't that what Paul said? I am crucified with Christ, nevertheless I live, yet not I, but Christ who liveth in me. And the life that I now live in the flesh, I live by the faith in the Son of God who loved me, and He gave Himself for me. And we can all say that about me because He died for me. When He was on the cross, I was on His mind. He looked maybe to this moment and saw me, and He wept for the condition I would be in without Him. And He made me a son by shedding His blood to pay for me and adopted me, giving me the status of being a son of God. And you too, if you're a member of the church, or if you're one of these precious little souls who's innocent and is still covered, has never seen the degradation of sin. I'm a son. I'm a soldier. I'm a son. I'm a servant. Oh, I mean, there's 6 or 7 books in the New Testament that start with the words, a name of a person, a servant. Paul, a servant of Jesus. James, the servant of Jesus. And that term is the doulos, or the bond slave, the one who was set free but stayed on his own. We're a servant of His. I choose to serve Him not because He's a taskmaster who whips me into submission, but because He gives me so much grace and He gives me so much love that I don't dare leave Him. I couldn't find anything better. I'm a servant. Sons, soldiers, sons, servants, are also His creation. Don't you think that matters to Him? He created something that it means something to Him. I made a bookshelf for my mom when I was a kid. And I thought for a long time it was gone because I just couldn't find it in the house. And I realized it had been relegated to the basement to hold pots and stuff. Because it wasn't a very good bookshelf. Right? Gaps between the shelves and the walls. And I was little, Dad helped me, but he let me cut it, let me nail it together. I'm kind of proud of that little piece of trash, I made that thing. I think if that house burned down and I could only get one thing, that would come up on the list. Because I poured my heart into that and did it for a reason. You and I are trash sometimes in God's sight. You know that? In fact, the words that are translated sin and there are other versions of it mean filth before God. Iniquity is filth. Sin is failure before God. Sometimes I might even fight God. And yet He still loves me. And yet He still forgives me because we're at creation. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God. The Word was God. The same was in the beginning with God. All things were made by Him, and without Him was not anything made that was made. He made me. He molded me. My very substance, both physical and spiritual, He created it. And that means something to Him. Does that tell you anything about where your focus or my focus needs to be? I mean, if He loves me so much, and if He's given so much, and He continues to give, I should focus on Him. There's an aspect. Well, let me ask you this question. A relationship is a contract. It's a covenant that you make with another person. And there's a number of different kinds of contracts. Some of them are somewhat like a slave, where you don't have a choice, you fulfill it, or there's consequences. That's not a very nice covenant to be a part of. But there's another covenant that God makes, and He says, if you'll do this, I'll do this. And that's the good relationship to be in. And are you fulfilling your end of the bargain? He's come and said, if you'll live like this, I'll give you this. Are you living like this? How's your relationship with God? Does that tell you anything about your focus? You have to be in the correct, you have to have a central focus. There was an aspect of His being about His Father's business that had to do with souls. We understand that. Jesus said, I came to seek and save that which was lost. He came to fulfill the old law and let it bloom beautifully into the blossom that is the New Testament church. He came for the very point of saving souls. And there is that about our purpose here too. And we won't go into it for time's sake. But if we need to live our life so that we see a soul and see a soul. And not a person who has flaws. And don't get caught up in the trap that evangelism is all about programs. Evangelism is about relationships. You want to save a person's soul? You better love that person. People don't care how much you know unless they know how much you care, an old saying. You better love that person. I have had the privilege of getting to know two older fellas, two different places that I've preached. One in North Alabama, one now in South Georgia. And had the privilege to baptize both of them into Christ. Similar life stories. They were both in the military. One was actually in the military during Vietnam. He was in the Navy, and he sailed on a destroyer, and his job was to load the cannons as they shot the shorelines and the islands out in the sea off of the mainland of Vietnam. The other guy was a truck driver in World War II. I met both of these at different times in their lives, but they'd also both, since they came home from those wars, had been divorced by their wives, and they lived in almost abject poverty and total depression. One of them I met because I worked at O'Reilly's, and so did he. Another one I met because he called the church building and said he didn't have any food. And I'm not telling you this to gloat about me, but I only know my experience. With the one from O'Reilly's, I was able to we just kind of hit it off. We became friends. His name was William. I guess it still is William. And William would come over to the house, and we'd sit down and eat supper. And he was old and single and living in a trailer, and he had Schwann's meals. You know, the Schwann's truck, you know. And he'd bring those over, and we'd heat those up together and then sit down at the table and eat and just hang out. We talked about guns, and we talked about football and all the stuff guys talk about. And after a while, we got to studying the Bible. And I watched this man read Romans 6, 1 through 8, over and over and over out loud until he was in tears and begging to be baptized. I did not bombard him with a program. I loved him, and I do to this day. And it was a success. Not because of me, but because of the material and the love that was showed to him that came from the Lord. With James, the fellow who had been in World War II, drove a truck in Germany after the war. He needed food. And we gave him food. That was all it took. So don't feel like you have to have a program. Don't feel like you have to have a group to go door knock. Don't feel like you have to have a church-mandated program to go save somebody's soul. Love somebody, and you'll see what happens. When you meet people, just love them. And you'll make these friendships that'll last forever. I talked to William. He lives 7-8 hours away from me. I talked to him yesterday. Friendships that will last you forever, and souls that'll go to heaven because you love somebody. Jesus came to seek and save that which was lost. How did he do it? He fed people. He healed them from their diseases. We can't do that part. But he loved them. So love people. We have to be counterculture in that we create a culture that permeates popular culture, and we abstain from being just like popular culture so that we can teach them. We have a central focus which allows us to know who I am with God and who God is to me. And again, that allows me to love people and show them the love of Jesus. But I also, like Jesus, have to be in the correct place. Jesus was in the temple. That's where the priests were. That's where the people who studied the old law were, and he was going to be around those folks. They found him in the temple. You know, it's fitting that he was in the temple, though, isn't it? You'd think that if Mary had an understanding, and we don't know what she understood. She had to have understood something, but we don't know to what extent she understood. But you'd think, looking back on it, what would the first place you'd look for Jesus would be? The building that was built like 1,700 years before he was born for him? That would be a good place to look. The temple was his house. He owned it, all right? It's a good place to look for him. He was in the correct place. You and I need to be in the correct place too. I'm glad you're here today. This is the right place for you to be. Tomorrow, this will be the right place for you to be too. I would even say Monday, this would be a pretty good place to be. Bring a friend. But Jesus was in the correct place more than just when he was in the temple. Let's finish out that chapter, Luke chapter 2. We lost him, didn't we? Y'all can't see. He's laying prostrate on his face, asleep in the front now. Oh, he woke up. Good. Need Caden's marshmallows to throw at people. It's all right. I'm going to sleep during Connor's next, so it's okay. Verse 50, this is amazing to me. They understood not the saying which he spake unto them. He went on down with them to Nazareth and was subject unto them. But his mother kept all these sayings in his heart. You know what that means? From that moment, and maybe before, whenever it happened, but from that, especially that moment on, Jesus knew that his job was to be about his Father's business. And yet, he subjected himself to Mary and Joseph anyway. Here's a 12-year-old who could have taken care of himself. But he didn't. Because he knew who he was given to. That's a lesson for us. When Paul says to honor thy father and mother, to obey your parents and the Lord for this right, that's what he's talking about. You might get to a point where you can take care of yourself. Won't be as good as they can, but you can probably make it. You should subject yourself to them anyway. I've got a dad. I subject myself to him still. His will wins out if he and I are fighting about something most of the time, because he's probably right, for one. But two, I just respect him to death. And that's a lesson for us. Not the lesson, but it is a lesson for us. And here's what I want to get to. Jesus increased in wisdom and in stature and in favor with God and man. I want to say that verse covers Jesus from 12 to 30. Because the next time you see him, he's entering public life, and under the Judaism, the Judaic system of the time, a man didn't enter public life until he was 30. So the next time you see him, he's 30. Here you see him, he's 12. That verse tells us what happened. In those years, he continued to learn. He grew in wisdom. About your Father's business, don't just be about your Father's business that one day you're in the temple. You better be about your Father's business all the time and continue to learn. He grew in wisdom. We talked about last night how the gospel gives us wisdom unto salvation. Are you getting nervous? Am I going over time? Okay. That the gospel gives us wisdom unto salvation. Continue to learn and study and sit at the feet of good people to teach you what the Bible says and continue in that. Jesus continued to do that. Even though, and the apostles did it too, there's evidence, these men studied the words that were written even though God was inspiring them with the words that weren't. When Paul's dying or close to it and he's in prison, what does he ask Timothy to bring to him? You remember? I want you to bring me a coat because it's cold, and I want you to bring me the books. I want to be close to the Bible. There was an old preacher who was killed in a car crash, and what I understand is when they pulled him out of the car, he was clutching his Bible to his chest. That could be a legend, I don't know. But it tells you about the person, doesn't it? This is what people thought about this person, is that when he died, he clutched the Bible to his chest. And I do know this to be a fact. I sat at the feet of Garland Elkins, and most of you probably don't know who that is or who it was. I had him as a teacher at the Memphis School of Preaching when he was in his late 80s. He died a couple of years ago. Before he died, he had gone into an incoherent state in the hospital. And he stayed that way until he died. And where you and I might just mumble off nothing, the nurses even said, and people who weren't Christians said, this man is incoherent and he's quoting Bible verses. The incoherent babble that came out of Garland Elkins' mouth when he was on his deathbed was the Bible. That doesn't happen by just a cursory glance on Sundays and Wednesday nights. That's a man who hid the Bible in his heart so that he wouldn't sin. We grow in wisdom like Jesus did. And he also grew in stature. That's a good one. That's something right now you don't have to worry about. You're going to grow up anyway. Your body's going to get bigger. And you're going to get like me and Ethan, and you're going to hit the roof, and then it's going to start expanding out this way, right? Especially Ethan, right? Not me, but Ethan. Look how fat Ethan is, guys. He's as ugly as a bearded woodchuck. I forgot about it until just now. We're going to grow up. Jesus grew up. His body grew to maturity. He was strong and he grew, but he also grew in grace. It says that he grew in favor, he grew with grace, with God and man. That's the goal for a person. I want to reach a point in my life where I have the grace and favor of my fellow man, and I have the grace and favor of God. This is saying Jesus grew properly. He was in the correct place in his life. At every position, he was in the right place. He was a counterculture type of person. He created a culture. He had the apostles, the disciples. He created a whole new body that would function as a whole. In the nucleus of it was born inside of an old system. And as that grew, the old system had to go. It's like when a rose bush buds up and you get these big bulbs on it, and then at some point in the year it opens up and becomes a beautiful flower. Judaism was the bulb. Jesus brought the pollen, and that grew into a beautiful church. He created a culture inside what was already there, and it grew into something that we're a part of now. Counterculture. He had a central focus. His relationship with God was in the right place, and he understood what he was there for, leaving us an example to do the same. And he was always in the correct place. We're not always going to be in the correct place. But we'll always know where the correct place is. And when we get off of it, we can find our way back. Don't despise me. The only way that will work, the only way people won't, is if we are about our Father's business. Following the example Jesus himself left.